It's ticklish business any way you look at it. Come on, we'll stick together.
Hello and welcome back to Ticklish Business, the podcast all about honoring and celebrating old movies. As always, I'm Kristen Lopez, joined by my fantastic co-host, Emily Edwards. Emily, how are you?
I'm wonderful. I'm so happy to be on this episode.
You are back. I am so happy to not be trying to figure out things to talk about on my own. It's always nice to have somebody to bounce things off of, and that is what we have going on here. But we're going on a trip. We're doing our annual celebration of different international classic film. We're going to be doing our international month for the next 2 episodes. But unlike our previous years, where we have gone to different countries through each episode, we are sticking with one country, that is Japan, and one director, that is Akira Kurosawa. We're doing that for the whole month, and we are kicking things off with 1954's Seven Samurai with our special guest, Alicia Malone. But before we get into that, I want to thank all of the amazing patrons who have continued to support the show while we have been trying to figure our stuff out and are slowly inching back into the world of bi-weekly podcasting. I want to thank Allie Moore, Danny, David Floyd, Gates, McF, Rachel Clark, and Shawn Goodreau, and the rest of our patrons that have continued to support us. If you have not made the jump to become a patron, or if you have left because we weren't putting stuff out and maybe want to come back to being a patron, you should. We're at patreon.com/ticklishbiz, and we do all sorts of fun things. I just sent out a mess of books to people, to various patrons, as well as our Ben Mank buttons that I gave out at the TCM Classic Film Festival. You can also listen to our whole bonus episode of TCM Classic Film Festival audio that we recorded. That there is a part 2, but it's only on Patreon. So consider supporting us through that. We greatly appreciate it. Well, I am so excited that our special guest to help kick off our International Month tribute to Akira Kurosawa is host, author, jack of all trades, one of my favorite redheads, Alicia Malone. Alicia, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Of
It's nice
course.
to see both of your faces as we do this on Zoom.
Yes. And I mean, you were the first person I thought of when we said we were going to stick to one country, one director for our international month. I wanted to have you on because you also have a new book out, TCM Imports, Timeless Favorites and Hidden Gems of World Cinema. So it would be ridiculous for us not to have you to talk about this. Before we get into the Kurosawa of it all and we start talking about Seven Samurai, which is our movie that we're starting with, I mean, I know that all the others, Ben still hasn't written a book, but Dave and Eddie have written books, and we had all been talking about, like, Alicia already has a book, but she's going to write another one. And so I've been very excited for you to talk about world cinema and do this. I mean, what did you want to convey or show with finally putting all your knowledge about international cinema into a book?
Thank you. Yeah, you can call him No Book Ben. He loves when you call him that.
That's gonna be next year's pin that I bring to the festival. So,
No Book Ben.
yes.
Yeah, he's got to get on that. But yeah, as you said, I've published 3 books previously, all about women in Hollywood, and I was saying to everyone that I was done. Like, no more nonfiction books. You know how hard it is, Kristen. It's
Yep.
like it's a lot of work. It takes a lot out of you, and I wrote the 3 in pretty quick succession. So a lot of these interviews I've been doing about this book, people are reminding me that I told them last time that I was never going to release another book. But then I was approached by Running Press, and you know how great they are to work with. And Cindy Sapala, the editor, approached me and asked me why I hadn't done a book for the TCM library. And I was like, I didn't know you wanted me to do a book for the TCM library. I would love that. And I'd always secretly dreamed, as I was interviewing people like yourself or all the other authors, of having my name on a TCM book. So when she said she was interested in working with me, I was very excited. And I was trying to think of what I would like to do. And I felt like a book on international cinema would be a perfect fit, seeing that I host the TCM Imports section of TCM, which is dedicated to foreign films. But then the tricky part was how to convey it, like you said. What do I want to get across? What kind of format is it going to take? I started listing out all the films that I would love to talk about, and it was about 250, 260 movies. And so I thought, okay, I've got to narrow this down somehow. About 50 seems like a good number for people to read and for me to be able to write within that time frame. And I knew I didn't want to do the greatest films of all time. So we're going to be talking about one of the greatest films of all time, but I didn't want to include this film in my book because I felt like it has been written about so often and by people much smarter than myself, film scholars and academics.
Yeah.
I wanted to have a book that felt very accessible and not daunting to people who might be scared of trying international cinema or just not know where to start because it is such a huge subject. And so in the end, I decided to organize it by season because I love watching fall movies in the fall and Christmas movies at the end of the year and scary movies around Halloween and summer movies in summer. And I just thought that would be a very accessible, easy to read way to discover some new favorites on international cinema. And the great thing was I ended up being much more eclectic in my list of films than I would have been if I'd just chosen my favorites, because I think all of us film lovers, we have the same type of genre that we'll return to time and time again. But this is such a wide range, many genres, high cinema, low cinema, everything in between, and hopefully something people can keep on their coffee tables when they're stuck for what to watch.
And you also have a Kurosawa movie in the book. I mean, Ikaru is on the cover, so Kurosawa is represented. We did Ikaru, if memory serves, on the podcast a couple years ago, which was my first Kurosawa. Far cry from this one. I could not have started with a different film. But I mean, for you, what is it about? I know you've talked about this on the channel when they do the little interstitial for TCM Imports. But for you, what is it about international cinema? We do International Month because we've talked about trying to not seem like privileged, white cishet people talking about just American classic films. But for you, what is it about international cinema that has appeals to you?
Well, I think, growing up in Australia, we got a lot of American content from Hollywood, obviously, but we also got a lot of foreign content. So on TV, we would see a lot of British comedies and British dramas. And in the cinema, there was always lots of different international cinema offerings. So I kind of grew up not really with too much distinction between classic Hollywood films and foreign films, because also Hollywood was foreign to me, being from Australia. So it all felt like it was in the same basket. And I started watching foreign films from a young age. And what it really did for me was open up my eyes to the world. And I think truly give me some empathy for people from other walks of life and take me on a trip, because I didn't actually travel internationally until I was in my 20s. So I was able to travel through watching all these movies. And when I got to America, I realized that there is quite a big distinction between Hollywood films and foreign films, and a lot of people feeling like foreign films might be boring or too academic or hard to get into or not be able to relate to. But I think once you start watching foreign films, you realize that movies are movies. It's a universal language, cinema, and that they usually touch on very human themes, especially the film we're going to talk about today.
Exactly. I mean, do you have a favorite international film that sticks with you that you go back to again and again?
So many, and I think it depends on my mood, and that's one of the things I wanted to do with the book. Was at the start of every entry I put, when to watch, like what kind of mood you should be in when you watch this movie. One that I love, a British film, is Brief Encounter, and that's a film that we show quite often on TCM. And I did want to include, I'd say, international cinema, because I wanted to include a lot of English language films, not just foreign language films. So films from Australia and from the UK. So Brief Encounter, beautiful, tragic love story that I return to time and time again. I also, of course, love a lot of the Australian movies. And in doing promotion for the book, it's been fun to talk about Picnic in Hanging Rock, which is a classic of the Australian New Wave. But I'm discovering that a lot of people here, it's a cat's tail, a lot of people here have not seen the film. And so getting to hear from Americans what they think of this Australian movie that is both beautiful and haunting is really exciting. I love hearing from people who have watched these movies for the first time and getting their reaction. So I also have like a special place in my heart for Amelie. And that is a film that I know a lot of people say is too saccharine, it's too feel good, it's too sweet. But I remember it was one of those times where I felt like I went into the theater feeling like one person and came out of the theater feeling like a completely different person. It was like it changed my worldview. And as I was walking out, I could hear the soundtrack accompany me as I walked down the street. I felt like Amelie seeing the world through new eyes. So that film will always be a special film to me, and I did include it in the book.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, there's no good way to transition. Let's just start talking about, we're honoring Akira Kurosawa for our International Month. And we're starting things off with 1954's Seven Samurai. And this is one, I mean, I want to get everybody's kind of background on Kurosawa before we start. I came late to international films, as somebody that watched the occasional like Truffaut film and was like, I don't understand this. This must be all like, again, like you were saying, Alicia, they're too esoteric, or people assume that. And we did Ikaru for the podcast, and that was one that just rips your heart out, and I was just like, oh, okay. There's that. But TCM did, I want to say, Summer Under the Stars, and they did a Kurosawa theme a day, and I taped a bunch of stuff, and that's how I got into watching his stuff. But I'm sure people are going to be shocked that I kind of eschewed a lot of the more popular Kurosawa movies. So this is the first time I've seen Seven Samurai, which has I know, which has gone on.
There's no wrong answer. I'm excited for you. I want to hear all your thoughts.
Right. And I mean, it's one of those where you find out how much it inspired other movies like The Magnificent Seven, like the Pixar film A Bug's Life, stuff like that. And so I have slowly come to really love Kurosawa, but I tend to like him more for his contemporary films, his dramas. We're going to talk about the next episode, we're going to talk about High and Low, which is one that is now being remade, but I think is just a very underrated, really cool crime thriller. So I'm very excited to get to finally cross this one off the list. It was very long. It's 3.5 hours. Did not know that until last night when I was like, I should watch the movie that we're talking about. But I'm glad I got to see it. Emily, what's your background with Kurosawa before we start talking about Seven Samurai?
Literally no one will be surprised to hear that this is my first Kurosawa movie and my first time watching Seven Samurai. I am very new to film, and a lot of it is because, fortunately and unfortunately, I made the decision not to watch a lot of foreign movies. When I was in college, I went to a school that had a film program, but I wasn't in it. And a lot of that was because I am very old and I was very broke in college, and I had a 10-inch CRT television. So I could not read subtitles on anything. And this was before, computers could play DVDs and things like that. So I just couldn't watch a lot of movies because I didn't have the means to. And now that I am older and better and have better television access, I've been making my way through a lot of the heralded, like totemic sort of foreign made films. They're not American made films. And it's just been a really, really lovely experience. I watched this and The Seventh Seal sort of like back to back, day by day. And I was like, what an interesting emotional journey to put myself on. But I really am so fascinated. I have a lot of friends here in Los Angeles who were born in Japan, raised in Japan. And LA has a very sort of almost monomaniacal focus on Japanese culture, of just like, obviously we have people from all over the Pacific Rim living here, but LA loves Japanese culture. And I always try to look at the way Americans look at Japanese culture, because we do have a very interesting and kind of abhorrent way of fetishizing the Japanese culture. But America has had such a huge rebirth of our fascination with Westerns. And so we have the Japanese concept of honor and the American concept of honor, and how those things interplay with one another has been really, really fascinating for me over the last couple of years as I work with my own fiction writing and sort of enveloping the concept of the Western. And I know I've brought this up in previous episodes as well. And so that sort of concept of honor and interplay of like cultural honor and how you sit with it and how you act on it has been really, really fascinating for me. And so to watch this, which has spawned, much to Kurosawa's dismay, as far as I can tell, American Western movies has been really, really fascinating. And that's just been what's been playing in my head for the last couple of days, basically.
I love that.
Yeah. I really love that because, well, firstly, I get excited anytime people say, I'm seeing this movie for the first time. I'm never one to be like, oh, you haven't seen it? How dare you? Call
I'm the
yourself
one
a
to do
film
that.
lover? Like, you cannot get out. I'm always like, welcome in. Come on. Like, the water's fine. Enjoy. And I love hearing people's first reactions to the movie. And Emily, you touched on so many interesting points about the film. And one thing in thinking about this movie for this podcast is that idea of heroism. And I think also that idea of helping others, not just being about yourself, but helping the good of the community. And that is something that is quite mythic to American stories, particularly Westerns, the lone figure who comes in to save the day. But here you have a whole group of heroes fighting for these underprivileged, townspeople that just need help. And there's something so delightful about that.
And I think the thing that actually caught me the most off guard about this movie is how deeply funny it is as well. If you are dealing with this incredibly bleak situation and a history of bleak situations that they do not shy away from, but it's incredibly funny. And it was just something that I was not expecting, because that's not the American perspective of Japanese cinema at all.
Yeah, and I think this film in particular, because it is one of the greatest movies of all time, it feels like it's going to be a Herculean effort to watch it, as you mentioned. 3.5 hours, it's black and white, it's foreign, subtitles, it's got all of that working against it. But once you start to get into it, you realize how compelling it is and how universal the themes are and how funny it is, and also how richly drawn the characters are. Each of the characters are so distinct from each other and have a wonderful backstory to them that I think it's more entertaining than people might expect.
I'll give the plot really briefly, but it tells the story of the aforementioned Seven Samurai. They are commissioned to help this small town of farmers that are set to be invaded by bandits when their crops are ready. Of course, they don't have any money to pay the samurai, so they're paying them in food and giving up their own rice to bring these people in. And as the movie progresses, the samurai learn about, as we've mentioned, heroism, come to become one with the villagers. There's a love story. There's fighting. It's got so much in it, found within it. And to go back to what Alicia was saying about the different themes of the movie, yeah, I was really struck by the fact that the bandits almost feel kind of ancillary. The fight doesn't really happen until I think the last like 45 minutes of the 3.5 hour movie you're watching, because it really is about this concept of crafting community. The fact that they go to the city to find these samurai, and they're like, well, we have no money, nobody's gonna work for free, as we see today, and they're like, well, we'll pay them in food, and eventually everybody comes to join the group for different reasons. Some of it's for food, some of it, like Toshiro Mifune's character, just wants to be included because he thinks he's super cool. They all have a different reason for wanting to join in. And I think what I was struck by is how much like we're talking about, TCM right now is doing a whole theme on defining the frontier. And I feel like American Westerns took a while to really deconstruct the cowboy and what the American Western has done in terms of crafting our portrayal of indigenous people and how we look at the West. And this is a movie that never shies away from that. There's a fantastic moment where Toshiro Mifune's character is talking about how, the samurai, they come in and the villagers are awful and they're horrible and they lie and they cheat and they beat you up. But why are they doing that? Why are they doing that? Is it because samurai often come into these towns and they, commit assault and they steal and they do all these things? So of course the townspeople are going to be dubious of their motives and afraid of them. And I had not seen that, and I don't know if an American Western in the 50s would have been that overt about saying, well, why do the Native Americans want us off their land? Is it because we might have taken it? I thought that was really amazing and really subversive for 1954.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the American Western took a long time to start to look at itself and think about the myth of the settlers finding this land and how the indigenous people reacted to them, and also just deconstructing the hero, which is a very masculine, hyper-masculine, quite toxic version of a hero. And I also think it's interesting that we talk so much about American Westerns when we talk about this movie, because we can also talk about Star Wars, we could talk about so many other movies that it inspired. But to me, it goes back to one of my main points about foreign films, which is they are directly related to classic Hollywood films and modern American movies. And people do see them as being so separate and like something that they can't get into, but actually everything is inspired by everything else. So Akira Kurosawa was inspired by John Ford, and then George Lucas was inspired by Akira Kurosawa. So it all works together. And that's one of the joys about watching a film like this is, like you said, you realize how much has been taken from this film.
Yeah, and people I don't think understand too that they also had huge production companies in different countries. France had Gaumont, of course, Japan had Toho. These were not little fly-by-night studios. They were huge, on par with MGM and Columbia and all of these big studios here in America. They were so ingrained, and I think that's always what frustrates me about the preservation of international cinema is that so many international classic films don't get the love and the restoration as some of these other ones. I mean, Seven Samurai's been put into 4K. It's widely available. You can watch it on Criterion. But then I'm always the person that is the rain cloud that's just like, yeah, but think of all the other countries. I talk a lot about, there's a whole swath of Lupe Velez Spanish language films that nobody's restored. I don't know if they even still exist. So it does make you think about how these different countries were inspired by American movie making to craft these studios. And even now they're still struggling with the concept of preservation and what gets saved and what enters the pantheon and all of that.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the film canon is something I have an issue with, because traditionally, I think it's starting to change now, but traditionally it was a very small group, usually white men, deciding what the greatest films of all time were, and then that gets put into lists that people refer to, and then they only watch those films, and then those are the films that get preserved, and those are the films that get shown, and it's such a small amount of what's really out there. And honestly, the movies that mainly go missing or are underserved by preservation movies made by people of color and women,
which just frustrating all around.
See, this is also such an interesting lens. This movie is such an interesting lens to look at auteur theory too, of just how much trouble it can get you in if you're interested in the business of film, of how this movie went wildly over budget, wildly over schedule, wildly, just completely off the rails. And you ended up with which inarguably is a masterpiece, but at the same time, very few other people are offered the option of going so out in left field for the business of making a film. And I feel like, we get to have these moments where it's the product of genius, but the product of genius at like 9 times the price that was initially pitched.
So true.
Yeah, this was the most expensive film made in Japan at that time, I think, which, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. I mean, it is just such an epic sweeping thing, and they wanted Kurosawa to film this at Toho Studios, where they had a set, and he said no. He wanted to construct a set in a different location. And he said, that he felt that the quality of the set will influence the performance. And
Hmm.
he really wanted to emphasize the authenticity. And of course, that led to a lot of struggles. He said, it rained all the time. They didn't have enough horses. It was just a really difficult one to make. But then you have the mastery of the cinematography and the editing. Kurosawa has been considered the world's greatest editor because he would shoot the movie and edit it at the same time, which does not happen at all. American filmmakers, and I think most international directors, take months after a film is made to
Hmm.
go through and edit and all of that. He was probably like living off of like 2 hours sleep, just editing
Yeah.
while he was shooting. And I think that it's one of the few times I will say, making a big budget movie, you see all of why it is necessary. The way that the locations are so distinct. You never feel like this is a bunch of people walking on a set that looks like the woods. There's a beautiful shot where one of the samurai is laying sprawled in a daisy field, and the camera's shooting down on him as he's
Mm.
watching them lure in one of these bandits. I mean, every single one of these scenes could be framed on a wall. It is that beautiful. And
Yeah.
it's magnificent.
Yeah, he was a real perfectionist and sort of somewhat similar to an Alfred Hitchcock that really planned out all the visuals and was able to use the camera in such interesting ways, both in terms of framing and in terms of movement. The camera is always moving, there's always a lot of action on screen. And I think that really helps with the pacing too, that even though it is 3.5 hours, it rarely drags, it just keeps moving, moving, moving. And I love the characters that he not only wrote, but also the way he filmed each of the actors. And they have such unique faces. They're so interesting to look at, and each one are distinctive from each other. I also love that this is like a heist movie, and it follows that same kind of pattern of getting the team together, and they all have special skills, and they all band together, and they plan out the heist. And then at the end, it's a battle instead of a heist, but it does follow that format, which came before Seven Samurai.
Every 80s movie, I think, was inspired by it. Every 80s actioner owes this movie a debt of thanks.
Yeah, I think even Avengers, it's like similar thing, similar thing.
Exactly. And I love what you said about everybody looking so distinct. I think that often is a very, people, and I've had friends say, that's an element of international cinema they don't want to watch. Everybody just kind of looks the same, which I'm like, hey, racist. But at the same time, there is what I appreciated about this movie is that even if I did not recall every character's name, I
Mm,
knew who everyone was, and I knew all of their backstories because everybody does look so distinct in terms of hairstyle and dress. And I love that Toshiro Mifune's character is always half naked for some reason. There's a lot of butts in this movie, which I did not anticipate.
yeah.
And I think that all of that creates a world where you really do care about the characters. I mean, the love story between the young guy and Chino, the girl who's dressed up like a boy in this entire movie. She's the world's worst looking boy. She just still looks like a hot girl.
Yeah, she does. Yeah.
But you care about these characters over the span of the entire movie, and you start to again really forget that the bandits are coming and that's what they're all working towards.
Yeah, and as you dig into more Kurosawa, you will notice the same actors popping up time and time again,
Yeah.
but their transformations are quite extraordinary. So Toshiro Mifune, you mentioned, I mean, just the physicality of how he plays this character. He's so childlike, and the way he's jumping around and very different to how he was in other Kurosawa films. And Takeshi Shimura, who plays the leader of the samurai, and he was in Akira and looked completely different, but just managed to transform themselves for every different role. And yeah, you'll notice the same troupe of actors that keep coming up in Kurosawa movies.
Yeah, Shimura did what, 21, I think, out of
Hmm.
the he worked with Kurosawa the most. And having seen several different movies of Kurosawa's over the year that I was watching my DVR where I had taped everything, he played family men, he played warriors, he played philosophers, he played funny characters, he played all of them, and it makes you think of kind of like in American cinema, people laugh about Sidney Greenstreet being like a leading man, or at least being allowed to be a big star at his age and the way he looked. And Shimura, I think, also is that same way, where you're just kind of like, this is a guy that should not have been a leading man. He's older, he's not Mifune level attractive, but yet he brings such gravitas to everything that he does. You understand why he's the leader. I think most people would be very surprised who have not seen this. And I know, because I was one of them that was like, wait, Mifune's not the lead? Like, I was very surprised that he was not the leader of the group. But you understand that, Mifune's character is such a, seat of your pants character that you need somebody like Shimura as an actor to kind of temper him. And I was waiting. I was like, please don't let this guy die, because he's so good. And I think that that's what you come to appreciate about the movie, is how Kurosawa was able to take a stable of performers and truly give them something different each time.
Absolutely, I agree.
I mean, we've talked about Mifune as a several times already at this point, but I do want to talk about his character in this film, because Emily, you brought up the humor of the movie, and I think he gets the majority of the funny scenes. I mean, from what I read, he was allowed to improvise a lot of stuff. He
Mhm.
was originally supposed to be the lead. Kurosawa was going to make him the star of the Seven Samurai, and then eventually decided, like, no, we're gonna play around with some things and let him, because they realized they didn't have any antagonist aside from the bandits, that they needed somebody that was, he saw nobody wants to watch a bunch of sober men walk around for 3.5 hours. So they brought in this character, and Mifune plays him. And what I love about the performance is it is so funny. There's that great moment where he's talking about like riding a horse, and the horse goes in the barn and then comes out and he's chasing after it, or the way he interacts with the children. And yet he's that quintessential anti-hero who constantly is screwing up. He goes to he wants the rifle for himself, so he leaves his post and he's like, everybody's fine. Meanwhile, everybody's dying. He is a character that you're just like, when is he going to get his act together? And when he finally does, it feels earned. But it's such a far cry from, some of the other movies that he did, where he's, either a more leading man, romantic lead, or a more, he loved playing old guys, which I think is very, very interesting too. He's so great in what is essentially supporting performance.
Yeah. I think it's truly wonderful how Kurosawa understood, and the stable of writers that contributed to this movie understood that putting people in a stressful situation, they're not all going to act the same. And that is certainly something that happens quite a bit in ensemble movies, where, I mean, they make billions of dollars, but Marvel movies, almost exclusively, it's like the world is ending and we're all going to be very serious about it. Where that's just an unrealistic understanding of the human psyche, which is all of these people have different backgrounds. All of these people have different experiences. They've all gone through multiple trials and hardships. And some people make like horrible jokes when things start going wrong, when they're facing death in the face. That really wonderful understanding of, I know that they created sort of biographies and sort of histories for every single character that or every single actor that had a speaking role in this. They understood how the people in the village were related to one another, the different sort of the genealogy of how the village came together, the backgrounds for all of the samurai, and that sort of level of detail to put into a fictional work is probably completely unheard of now, when you're expected to sort of development is the shortest period of trying to raise funding is the long period of trying to make a movie now. And that sort of level of detail is just so obvious here in an incredibly subtle way, because also when it is set is such a fascinating thing. I understand that, the history of samurai is contained in certain sort of like eras of the Japanese government, but it's set so far in the past that it's not relatable to anybody. So they had to bring all of the characterizations forward in order to make these people in this time in this trial incredibly relatable. And it's just the detail that's put into everything is so fascinating.
Yeah, I think one of the things I love about Toshiro Mifune's character, I mean, I just love the scene where he talks about the townspeople, the farmers, and how he came from farmers and not to judge them in certain ways. And I think they add so many layers to each individual character that, as you said, you get to know them over the course of the movie, you get to really like them. And even if you're frustrated by his character at some point or laughing with his character at some point, you do also have real empathy for him.
Yeah, when he's trying to sort of join the gang and he's got the scroll of his lineage, and they make fun of him for showing a scroll where he's the person he says he is only 13 years old and also a girl. And they really just make fun of him and want to break him down a little bit and push him away because he doesn't have a lineage. It's just a really beautiful part where he's just like, and I'm going to rip up the scroll. It doesn't matter. I'm going to follow these people wherever they go because I need to do this, whether or not the samurai want me there or not. It's a really I thought that was one of the best scenes in the entire film.
Well, and it's contrasted so beautifully with the young boy who wants to be the disciple, right? Who's very young and innocent. We've seen that character again in all manner of 80s movies. The young guy who, and even in the Western, the Jeffrey Hunter-esque character in something like The Searchers. And you have the whole point of the movie is learning to care about the whole, the collective, as opposed to the individual. And I think that it's always going to baffle my mind that this came out the same year as Godzilla, which also is another movie about banding together against a common threat. Albeit one is a giant monster. But I think that both movies coming out in the same year also do a really good job of emphasizing, and we talked about this when we talked about Godzilla, this post World War II view of Japan. We talked about it a little when we talked about Italian cinema post World War II when we did 8.5. And I think people tend to assume that a lot of Japanese cinema post World War II is just often about like struggle, and to watch Godzilla alongside something like Seven Samurai, it really is this concept of like vengeance is great and all. You see the little old woman that wants to kill the bandit that they bring in to avenge her son. And they're like, yeah, it's great, but they're still coming tomorrow. Like the rest of them are still coming. So you may get rid of one person that you feel, it's one faceless person that you feel owes you a blood debt, but it doesn't take away the problem. And I think Godzilla is kind of the same way. It's just that once this monster shows up, like, what have we wrought? What horrors are going to come down the pipe that we don't know about? And so I think that's always what's interesting about Kurosawa, and he did a lot of other kind of existentialist types of movies later in I'm trying to think of the one he did with Mifune that is very death centric, and I can't think of the name of it right now, but he was very much talking about how the Japanese coped with the atomic bomb and coming out of the war and feeling like they were a collective enemy for the US for so long, and then also just their own trying to come together as a country. I think all of that is bound very deeply into this story that is set in the 1500s, and talking about this feudal system. And from what I read, it wasn't really that far off from what most Japanese people were still just, dealing with, because I think they said like 80% of Japan at the time was still agricultural workers. So the concept of the harvest and, having to give up their crops for, people, that was still a very real thing for them. So even though it is set in this time that we are meant to assume is a time long in the past, there were still connections for people watching it in 1954.
Absolutely. And I think still connections for people watching it today. We
Yeah.
can definitely relate to a lot of these themes. And, you're talking exactly about another thing that I love in terms of foreign cinema, which is that you get to talk about everything that was happening at the time. People say, oh, keep politics out of films. It's impossible because so much of the movies that are made a product of what was happening in
Yeah.
politics at that time and in society, and it's all a little time capsule. And that was what was really fun about writing my book, was I got to delve into world history, political history, as well as filmmakers, and filmmaking. It really covers the gamut, and it's so interesting to look at each film in terms of what was happening in the country at the time.
Alicia, I'm curious to get your thoughts. I mean, where do you see Kurosawa as a filmmaker, amongst the American canon of today, and I guess how does this, we're going to talk about high and low on the next episode, but where do you see this in his overall body of work? Where did he go from here? A
Yeah,
preview of the next episode.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because when you do think of Kurosawa, you usually think of these kind of period samurai films, but actually, he made a lot of modern day contemporary movies that were directly speaking to what was happening in Japanese society at the time, and worked on many different genres and many different tones. And I think the way that he developed as a filmmaker was just to keep on following his instincts when it came to the type of material he was going to produce. Kept working on his cinematography. That's something that you'll continue to talk about with every Kurosawa film, is his framing, high and low. There's some really great shots there that you could definitely put up on your wall. His storytelling ability, the actors that he keeps coming back to. And he really is like a director's a director. He's the director that I think most filmmakers, particularly American filmmakers, will speak to as being a huge influence. I've heard Martin Scorsese say that he was like his master and he learned a lot from him. Francis Ford Coppola and George Lucas, all of these people that we think of American masters, definitely look to Kurosawa. And Kurosawa was very varied in what he could do in terms of filmmaking, and the styles and the stories that he attacked. And he was very interested in the Western world, Western art, and Western culture. So he is very tied to American culture, I think, more than most Japanese directors were.
Yeah, it's amazing to look at his filmography. I mean, right before this, just in 1950, started off with, directing Rashomon, which was one of two films he did in 1950, which is another movie that every director worth their salt has stolen from in some way. And then he did Ikaru 2 years before this movie, and then he would follow that up with just, I mean, hit after hit. I Live in Fear was the one I was trying to think of the
Oh,
name.
yes.
Which is another just fantastic film all about the existential dread of nuclear war. It's
Yes.
set in the feudal period. But then he would follow that up with, Throne of Blood, and end up doing, Yojimbo. 1963 is when he does High and Low, and, keeps going into that period. But it's amazing to watch a filmmaker like him, and it's why I wanted to do High and Low as the second one, not only because it's being remade by Spike Lee this year, but
Oh, is it?
because yeah, with
Oh,
Denzel.
interesting. Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see how he pulls that off. But I wanted to show one of his more historical films and then one of his more contemporary films. And I think to watch this, you know, in watching so much international cinema, there is this love of the past that all international directors love, no different than Western directors. But I think what always is amazing to me when I'm watching, Japanese cinema of that's set in kind of these feudal low, like Onibaba is another great example.
Mhm.
There's such a heightened element to it. And I was watching when I was watching this, and the way that the characters are, Mifune is a obvious example. He's very expressive. He's jumping all around. He's got these great facial expressions. But the heightened quality to Japanese cinema, the theatricality of it, I think is something that has to be experienced because when I say theatricality, people are going to be like, "Oh, it's stagey," or it's just really weird. Like, no, it's big emotions and it's big themes and I think Kurosawa was able to corral all that in a really skillful way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think yeah, some of the acting you might say it's overacting. It is very heightened, as you say, but I think it's all appropriate within the story, and it's not just to be high emotion. It's what the scene called for at the time, and it probably stemmed out of theater, Japanese theater. It probably has a tradition in Japan that style of acting.
Yeah. As we wrap it up, let's do some final thoughts. Seven Samurai, I mean, it's a masterpiece. You really can't say much more than that. Do I love it as much as something like High and Low? It's because I probably saw High and Low first. I think High and Low just has really interesting things, which I'm gonna get an angry email from somebody saying, "You don't like Seven Samurai best?" I just it's all the journey, okay? I still appreciate it, but it is definitely a movie that, is going to be high on my Kurosawa rankings, but not my favorite. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. But I'm glad I got to see it. I'm glad I crossed it off the list. It's easy to see the inspirations, and Kurosawa is just he's a wunderkind. I mean, he's fantastic. Emily, final thoughts on Seven Samurai?
It's something that I'm going to take with me when I work on my own fiction projects of just being able to figure out the pacing. And, all of it is about the buildup and release of tension. For the fact that the film really only has that one cataclysmic payoff at the end, the pacing of being able to to create that amount of tension for 3.5 hours is incredible without it being boring, without you just wanting a fight, without you losing the audience really in any way. It's just something that I'm going to have to go back and rewatch and sort of digest fully how he manages to build that tension over the course of an incredibly long period of time. We are American movies went into the realm of it has to be 90 minutes, start to finish, and then we're done. And that's how you make a commercial movie. And thankfully, we are moving away from that in order to let you digest over plots for significantly longer periods of time. But 3.5 hours is still really stretching the American sort of like patience for audience patience. And I'm just so fascinated. I'm so glad I got to watch this and talk about it with you because it's something that I'm going to have to figure out for myself and try to emulate and try to figure out how to build up that tension in a book in a 350-page book with only one payoff. That just sounds next to impossible. And I'm looking forward to toying with that a little bit.
Yeah, Seven Samurai is definitely like a magic act, like you pointed out. There's so many things that could have gone wrong, or so many things that could work against it. It could be boring or just tedious, but it definitely is a masterpiece of pacing and of cinematography. You can definitely see why so many filmmakers were inspired by it. It's a film that I watched, very studiously when I was a teenager and trying to cross off all the greatest films of all time off the list. But I only came to appreciate much later as I was able to, as you suggested, Emily, digest it on my own terms. And that's what I would recommend for people. Definitely give it a go. It is more entertaining than you might expect it to be, but don't worry about having to read into it too academically. Just go along for the ride, let it wash over you, and make up your own mind about it. It is also not my favorite Kurosawa film. Akira is my favorite Kurosawa film, but I definitely can appreciate everything he was doing with Seven Samurai and the way that it continues to inspire people today.
Exactly. Well, Alicia, we thank you so much for wanting to chat with us all about Kurosawa in your book. TCM Imports, Timeless Favorites and Hidden Gems of World Cinema is available now. You can buy it wherever you buy your books. Please buy it because authors take a lot of time out of their day to write books, and we love to be appreciated. So, but Alicia, where can fans find you online? Anything else you want them to know about that's coming up? This episode's going to go up June 4th, if there's anything you want to promote around that time.
Well, thank you both for having me. It's such a delight to talk to both of you. And thanks for shouting out my book. Yeah, go and buy it. Buy it from a brick and mortar store is what I would recommend. But I'm a weird person who has no social media whatsoever. So there's nothing online that I want to promote. But definitely you can always catch me on Turner Classic Movies on Tuesday nights and Sundays during the day. Things that I would like to shout out on TCM. Starting in June, I am doing summer romance. So this was an idea I pitched to TCM. I was like, I just want some like escapist summer romance, just a romantic movie every Sunday. So the first movie of my Sunday block all throughout June, July, and August is a romantic film that I've chosen. And that's been a lot of fun to pick the titles and to write the intros and rewatch these movies is a great excuse to rewatch some of my favorite films. So look out for that over the summer. And then, of course, you'll get out Summer Under the Stars and all the usual wonderful programming at TCM. And stay up late or at least set that DVR for TCM Imports. It is on late every Sunday night, but you will see some fascinating movies from all over the world.
I do love that you are doing a summer romance series in June. June 15th is when my TCM Volume 2 book on romances is due. So I feel like it's going to be that great kick over the cliff as I am bemoaning having to finish that and get it done. So, yay,
no, I can't
synergy.
wait to read it. Yay. Very exciting.
That's going to close out Ticklish Biz for today. Emily, where can fans find you online? Anything you want to shout out, throw out?
Oh, golly. Well, I am absolutely everywhere that I deign to be. No longer on Twitter. I'm not calling it anything else, but I'm on Blue Sky and Instagram at Ms. Emily Edwards. That is MS Emily Edwards. Also, if you're interested in irreverent book chat, Kristen has been a wonderful guest on F Boys of Literature this season. And this season we are back and enjoying a lot of chats about some interesting books. So if you'd like some books to go with your film library, I would love it if you could check out F Boys of Lit, and and that's basically on all podcatchers everywhere.
I like the term podcatchers. That's my new thing. You can find me on all social media because apparently I have no integrity these days. Social media is a necessary evil, and I'm just gonna embrace my overlords with open arms because I can't fight anymore. But you can find me on all social media, Kristen Lopez 88. I have my Substack, The Film Maven, where I talk all about movies, disability, things that irk me. You can Emily's posted stuff on there as well. You can subscribe to that at The Film Maven. That's 2ms.substack.com. I want to once again thank everybody who supports us via Patreon. You can become a patron for just $1 a month for less than the price of a cup of coffee or thing of eggs, whatever your
way less than eggs.
Yeah, whatever you're measuring things by these days. We are less. We do all sorts of things. We give out gifts. I just gave out books to everybody, and I probably will have more books to give to everybody. So you might want to consider becoming a patron. That's patreon.com/ticklishbiz. We will be back in 2 weeks to close out our tribute to Akira Kurosawa. We're going to be going, as I mentioned in the episode, from the past to the modern day. We're going to be talking about a movie that is set to be remade this year by Spike Lee. It is 1963's High and Low. Till then,